In this video, I'm taking you behind the scenes of my new song in GarageBand and giving you 10 practical tips that you can use in your next mix. So, let's go. Hi, my name is Pete and welcome to Studio Live today. Now, this is a project that I'm almost finished mixing in GarageBand, and as I've been mixing, I've been noting down the different strategies and methods that I used to mix this song, and I thought I would share these with you as there may be some ideas in there that can help you with your next GarageBand mix. There's some other videos all about mixing down in the description, but this one we're going to focus in on these 10 practical tips for mixing your next song. Let's get started. Tip number one is kind of generic, but it's to keep your track volumes low. You'll see here that I've got guitar tracks here. I've got a bass track, more guitars, vocals, got some iSymphonic string and brass instruments here. And further down, we've got some virtual instruments. And what you'll probably notice is that all of them are sitting around about 1/3 volume. And what a lot of folks that I see mixing do is that they'll start their mixes with their volumes all up really loud, which is okay when you get to 2, 4, 6, 8 tracks. As soon as you get up to a larger track count, you get this big saturated mess. So let's just play a portion of this, and what you'll be able to see and hopefully hear is that this is all balanced out and we're not peaking or clipping the signal. So let's hit play. From a distance, observing social distancing rules. And I may have even gone too low in this case, but the point here is that in the digital world, too low is better than too high. If you are too high and you're clipping, that can really make your sounds sound bad. You can always easily turn things back up when you're mixing. It's harder once you're over the top to start turning things down. So if you've got your volumes all up to 11, maybe consider just turning down each of those track volumes. It'll make your mixing that much easier. Tip number 2 is to mix as you go. So there are 2 ways to approach mixing. You can either do what's called faders down mixing. So I could come to all of these tracks, put them all to 0, and then build them up. Add the drums, the bass, the guitars, the vocals, the strings, and build it up that way. What I prefer to do is to actually mix as I go. So as I started this, I recorded in the scratch guitars and the scratch vocals. You've seen that in a previous video if you want to check that one out down in the description if you missed that one. But then I've re-recorded all of these, and as I record, I've started tweaking the volume so that we get a static mix. By the time I finished all of these, and the last couple that I did with the piano and the strings and this pad, by the time I did those, the song was pretty close to a decent mix. So then I only had to go in and start tweaking sounds to get it right. Now, with most of these things, there is no right and wrong way. So if you prefer to record all your tracks in at a normal volume, put all your faders down, and then bring everything back up, then that is absolutely fine if that works for you. But this strategy is what I've found works better for me to mix as you go, start getting it. And the same goes for things like EQ, compression, and even reverb and delay. If you add those in as you go, it can make the final mix process even easier. Tip number 3 is about track volume, but the volume when you're actually recording, because what I tend to do is I will actually want the volume of the track I'm recording at that time to be louder. So especially for vocals, guitars, and especially bass, if I'm playing that back, I want to be able to hear that instrument more in my mix. And the easiest way I've found to do that is to actually turn the volume of that track up. So if we take this bass, for example, if we play back this bass at the level it is in the track at the moment, it works with the mix, as we can hear. We don't want it any louder there, but when I was playing along with this, because I recorded the guitars and the vocals and everything before the bass, it was hard to hear that. So all I did was turn up the bass, and then if we play it back there, let's bring it back in the mix. Affecting us all. We are in absolute lockdown. So you wouldn't want that in your final mix, but when you're recording, that can really help. Let's show you a practical example here with the vocals. So here's my vocal track here. If I go to the microphone option here, you don't want to turn up your input gain. That you need to set. And I've got another video about input gain you can check in the description. But you want to set your input gain so that you're not clipping, you're getting a healthy signal. But your output gain, you can absolutely put up to 11. Whatever you need to put that output to, because that only affects the playback. As soon as you finish recording, you can bring your output level all the way back down to wherever it needs to be in the mix. So don't be afraid to turn up your output volume when recording if it's going to let you hear that sound come through better and give you a better recording, and then you can drop it back down and make it sit nicely in your mix. Tip number 4 is about our MIDI tracks. So all of these green virtual instrument tracks are MIDI tracks, and there's two different ways to manage the volume or the velocity or the loudness of a MIDI track. There is the velocity of the sound and the volume of the sound. So let's give you an example here. We'll grab this piano. If we solo this piano, it's very sort of light piano that just sits in the background. Let's hit play. And you can hear that I've got that do 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 do. So that's the velocity, how hard it's being hit, and different instruments sound different with different levels of velocity. Now, if we wanted to change the velocity of this instrument, we can tap here and we can tap on edit, and then we can actually come in here, and if we tap on any one of these notes, we can tap velocity, and we can actually drag that up or down. So that will make it sound different. For this one, for instance, if we tap velocity, we'll try that again. We tap on velocity and then we drag this all the way up. Can you hear how it's going to sound a lot harder when we hit the top. And if you go down, it's a very soft sort of sound. So you can actually dial in the velocity of each individual note there in the MIDI track. And once again, a heap more about editing MIDI down in the description. But of course, the other way that we can manage this is if we're here in our mixer, by sliding out there, we can turn the volume overall up and down. So think about it this way. You can have a piano that's played very gently and quietly with the volume all the way up so it's louder, or you can really bash it out and have a loud hit on the piano, but then turn the volume back down so it sits in your mix. So keep that in mind whenever you're using a virtual instrument, a MIDI instrument, one of these virtual tracks, that there are two different ways to manage that. So if you're finding that your songs are not sounding right, check those two places. Is the velocity too loud or too soft? Is the volume too loud or too soft in your virtual tracks? Tip number 5, while we're talking about MIDI instruments, I had a question this week, and that is, how do you balance when you're using virtual instruments and real instruments in the same song? How do you make sure that they don't sound like one's sitting on top of the other and that they're actually part of one cohesive song? Well, the answer is generally reverb and delay. And I'll show you the technique that I use. So when I'm recording a track here, I'll record it in, and then one of the first things that I do when I get to the mixing phase is come in here to my mixer and add in some master effects. So again, I cover these in more detail, more links in the description if you want to follow up. We can actually tap here, we can choose what type of echo we want. So I've got a quarter note echo on this one, and what reverb. So I'm just using the default reverb on this track, but you can put it in a large hall, medium hall, any of the other ones. So that's something I do pretty early on. And then what I do here is I put every different track as we go through. What you'll notice is they've all got slightly different amounts, but they all are in that same master reverb and delay or echo. And the beautiful part about that is it glues your mix together, because think about it this way. What we're showing here is we've got drums, piano, a synth instrument, we've got strings and brass, we've got two vocals here, we've got guitars. They are all supposedly playing as one entity in one location. That's the whole concept of music, yeah? You want to play as an orchestra or a band or a group. And the best way to get this from individual things to one cohesive mix is to actually use our reverb and echo. And you can see here I don't use a heap on everything, but there's a little bit of at least that reverb on everything except the bass. The bass doesn't need that. Bass sounds need to be precise, and you don't generally want reverb on your bass. So that's what I recommend and what I do to glue things together. So if we bring just these tracks, so let's just get these MIDI tracks together here. We play all of these along together. They sound like this. So can you hear that sense of space that we have in there? And then when we bring our vocals back into here,
relying on remote access software to make the world safe.
So it sounds like the vocals are within that sound, not like there's a bunch of sound with vocals sitting on top. At least that's the intention. So that's another tip. Your reverb and your delay or echo on your tracks. If you dial in a little bit on each one, you get that nice glue. Your tracks are going to sound cohesive. Tip number 6 is more of a generic one, and this is about the balance of your mix. And when I'm talking balance, I'm of course talking about the volume balance. So yes, we do want to make sure that we've got our static mix in here. We've talked about that before here on the channel. And again, more videos about mixing if you want to check those out. But we're also talking about the left and the right, the panning balance. So we want to make sure it doesn't have to be exactly the same all the time. But if one is leaning to the left or the right, throughout the entire mix, it's going to be distracting. So let's just take a listen and a look at this, and I'll show you what I mean. So if we come here to where we start the second verse of this one and hit play.
How can I bring justice? Don't think I can last.
And if you look up here at this meter, and you won't have this on your iPhone, so you will just have to use your ears, but you'll notice that they're both hitting. Yes, the left and the right are going up and down a little higher than each other as we go along, but they're sitting around about the same. There's not one that's just like really out there and one really back. Let's hit play again and take another look at this meter up the top.
Hard to recognize villains when they're wearing a mask.
So again, it's just pushing. You can see, yep, one goes up like that. But overall, you generally want to have that stereo balance as balanced as you can. Again, doesn't have to be perfection. You do want some of those things coming in and out, but keep an eye or an ear out for balancing your mix between your left and right pan. Tip number 7, and this is one I use all the time. I showed you this briefly just before. But when we got towards the end of this song, and my wife actually helped me co-write this song, and as I was mixing it, she said, something's missing. Like it's sounding too vacant. It needs this sound behind it. Like what's missing behind it? And I said, we need a pad. So we already had some horns and some strings here. So we were getting these sort of sounds here with the horns and strings, which we're adding somewhat of a pad. So let's take a listen to these. So that was already helping, but there was something missing here, and we needed to just have another more sustained pad throughout here. So let's come back to the start of this section again and add in. So this is the pad that we added in here. Let's take a listen to it by itself. And again, you can hear it's not really doing a whole lot. We get to this next section, it's going to do a little bit more. If we bring this back in with these, take a listen to how the pad just fills out this sound now. Can hear it? It's just adding that little bit extra. And if we bring this back in, so let's bring our guitars, say, back into the mix here, to this section. Bring our guitars and our bass. Now take a listen to the instrumental of all of these together. In fact, let's bring it up here to where we kick into the chorus and play this with these 3 pad type instruments and then our 3 guitars, or our 2 guitars and our, actually we'll bring the lead guitar in too. Let's take a listen. It's a quick, effective way. You can hear it sort of more like a oh. It's almost like there's a choir sitting behind it. So don't be afraid to use a pad. I use pads in punk music, rock music, R&B, rap music, whatever type of music. Don't think it's just for electronic music. Some of the best artists, think Coldplay, think Muse, think Radiohead. They've always used synths and they've always used pads underneath their tracks. So don't be afraid to experiment with a pad. It'll make your tracks really pop. Tip number 8 is to avoid copy and paste. Now, I know you might be thinking, but Pete, copy and paste is something that's so cool about digital recording. We can record something once and then we can copy it and paste it in if it's the exact same thing. Now, yes, if it's a percussion loop, if it's a click or a hand clap or some drums or something very simple that you're just repeating, I 100% agree. The problem is that sometimes folks take it too far, and I've been super guilty of that. I've been like, hey, it's just a rhythm guitar part, right? It shouldn't have to be that different the second time around, so why wouldn't I take this rhythm guitar part and paste it in here? Well, the thing is that over time, you tend to build up your parts a little bit more, and the best songs generally, and again, we're talking generalization, there's no right or wrong here, but generally you want your second verse and second chorus to be different, to evolve, to change. Now, a good example of this is this pad that we just looked at here. What you can see here is in the first half of the song, the pad is quite simple. It's playing one note at a time, and it's very simple. If we take a listen to just this pad, you get the gist. It's playing one thing at a time there. If we come in here, like let's go to towards the end here to where we're getting into this second chorus, it's playing a much more complex kind of rhythm and melody. Let's play it. So the idea there is that in the first chorus, it's just adding a little bit. The second time around, we want to build it up to this big final chorus. So that's why I say try to avoid copy and paste. The same thing goes if you've got two guitars left and right. So I've got guitar left, guitar right. You can see they're very similar. In fact, they're almost the same parts. But the reason that I've played these twice is you can put one on the left and one on the right, and you get a bit more of a interesting kind of sound. So let's play the chorus of these two guitars here, if we hit play. So you can hear there that I'm just playing a few notes a little bit differently, and it's creating a lot more texture. If I just grabbed those two and used the old process is what you do. You delay one by a couple of milliseconds and then copy and paste it. It's okay. You can do that if it's going to work for your song. But the better way to do it is to re-record the exact same part again, put one left, one right. You get a really rich and full stereo sound. So there you go. Copy and paste is cool, but don't use it all the time. Try and avoid it when you want to make sure that you have some variety in your project. Speaking of stereo and left and right, if you want to add some stereo width to your project, there's a few ways to go about it. Obviously, you can grab different instruments and spread them left and right, but you can also use things like stereo delay, or you can even use the spread option in your reverb. So let's take a look at something like this. So if we grab my vocal here, this is the lead vocal that I've got for this track, and we go up to the mixer icon here and plugins and EQ. You'll notice that we've already got some track reverb on here, and it's already kind of spread there. So if we listen to this, let's just go back to the start of this and hit play. We'll listen to this. It's already reverberating a little bit into the stereo space. Let's see what we mean.
Fly from a distance, observing social distancing rules.
But what if we want that a little bit more? Well, we can increase the spread here, and we could even increase the reverb time a little bit. So now it's actually going to bounce around in our stereo space a bit. Let's listen.
Relying on remote access software to make the world safe.
So hear how it's reaching the edges a little bit more. You can do the same sort of thing with other stereo effects. Anything that has stereo in the name, there's flanges that are stereo. Stereo delay is one of the plugins that you can use here. It's going to push it to the side. So if you've got a bunch of mono tracks and you're thinking your song is too down the middle, you want to spread it out a bit, there you go. Use your reverbs, your delays, and your other stereo effects on your mono tracks. It'll turn them into a stereo track. It'll bounce them around to the sides. It'll make your stereo width of your song a lot more appealing. And last but not least is tip number 10. And this is how to do a quick master of your final mix. I use this on this one and I use it all the time. And this is where you want to hear what your song will sound like. You don't want to go through a full mastering process, but you just want to limit it. You just want to bump it up a little bit with a limiter. So let's show you how to do this now. We're going to use our old friend, the merge function. So what we need to do is tap right here on one of our tracks, doesn't matter which one, tap on merge, and now we're going to select all of the tracks that we want. And this is actually cool because it will mix all of them down nice and quickly into one stereo file. So we'll keep scrolling on down and go all the way to the bottom. That's our last track. We'll select all of those. They're all good to go. We'll then tap on the merge button here in the top right. What this is going to do is duplicate the song. So it'll back up your project. You won't lose any of your changes, so don't worry about that. And then it's going to merge all of these down into one stereo file. And what we can then do is add a limiter and get an idea of what it will sound like and then export it. And I'll show you what it will look like once we export this track, and then we can actually take a look. And there we go. It has merged that into this one merged stereo file. Now, the first thing I like to do is come on in here and just sort of trim off the front like that, bring it back to the start of the track, and then we'll do the same with the end here. We'll take the end off to about there. Now what I can do is I can actually add a limiter to this stereo track to see what it will sound like mastered. So if we tap here on the mixer icon, go to plugins and EQ, hit the edit button and tap the plus here. We can then go audio unit extensions and scroll on down this list, and we have one of these here. The Apple Peak Limiter is what we're looking for. There it is, AU Peak Limiter. So that's added now. We can tap on that one and we can just dial up this pre-gain a little bit. You can play around with attack and release time. I'll talk about that a bit more again in some more videos all about mastering down below. You've got some homework to do from this one if you want to learn more. So what I can do is I'll leave it here and we'll play it back. We'll go to a section where I know it's going to be a bit louder. We'll play this back and we'll dial this up and just see what it's going to sound like as a mastered mix.
Relying on remote access software to make the world
So you can see there that you can start bringing it up, and you might not need much limiting at all because it has normalized this track already. That's the other thing to do. There is another way that you can actually reduce the volume before you export if you're finding your volume's too loud. That's going to be linked down below, but I think we've talked about enough here in this one. There you go. Some tips, 10 tips that you may want to try when you're mixing and then mastering your tracks in GarageBand. Hope you found this useful. Check out the links down below if you want to learn more, and I'll see you on the next one.